want to get us underway and begin our really exciting morning of programming. And to do that, I'm going to introduce our first speaker, who is the Vice Chairman for the Americas from Wood Mackenzie. Ed Crooks joined Wood Mackenzie in 2019 in that capacity, and is one of the leaders of the firm's research into commodities, companies, and global trends. He's also the very popular host of The Energy Gang, which is an incredibly in-demand energy podcast, and is a member of the National Petroleum Council, an industry body that advises the US Secretary of Energy. Can you join me in welcoming to the stage to kick off day 2, Ed Crooks?
Well, hello. Good morning, everybody. Thanks very much for that fantastic introduction. It's a great pleasure to be here at this really amazing event. I had a fantastic day here yesterday. I hope all of you did as well, and I'm looking forward to another great day today. What I want to talk about today is this question: who's afraid of AI? By which I mean, what do we think are going to be the implications for the energy transition of the rise of AI, and is that something we should be scared of? And I think certainly there are some very good reasons to be worried about AI, and I'm going to talk about some of those in a moment. I think at the end of the day, I want to leave you with a positive and hopeful message. Hopefully, you will leave this session with a sense of optimism about the future and a sense that we can make it better, but definitely I think there are reasons we should be nervous, and there are things we have to be, if not actually afraid of, very definitely very aware of with AI. So let's think about a few of those. As I say, this seems to me the big question really with AI at the moment, the question of, are we building something that will ultimately come to destroy us? And you'll hear people, of course, talk about some of these kind of science fiction type things about, Skynet, the Terminators. Are we going to have an artificial general intelligence that will decide that human life is dispensable and wipe us all out? Not really going to get into that today. Maybe we are, maybe we aren't. I'm no expert on that. I'm not going to try and tell you that that can't happen. But certainly, I don't think it's something which is an imminent threat. The imminent threat, I think, is rather different. As I say, when you think about what AI actually looks like at the moment, it's not really that kind of sci-fi type of thing. Sci-fi AI, that's Terminators and Skynet and replicants and the Matrix and all those kinds of things. Footnote on whether the Matrix is really AI, we can have an argument about that later, but broadly speaking, it's in that category. The actual AI that we really have right now is rather different, of course. It's, it'll do your term paper for you. It makes a mess of your Google search results. It's a way of generating funny memes that people put on Facebook and so on. So it's not, doesn't seem incredibly threatening maybe right now. That's probably something you've seen. That's the kind of thing which is the most famous sort of output of AI at the moment, these kind of artificially generated images. This is Shrimp Jesus. That's the kind of thing that you'll see a lot of on Facebook if you spend too much time on Facebook and have too many relatives that are into this kind of thing. So, as I say, it doesn't look like a massive threat. Certainly doesn't look like something that's going to take over the world. It does look fairly kind of innocuous, but it does have some big problems. And it also has a lot of potential, and I think it's important to think about those two things together. And I think just thinking about things like the Shrimp Jesus might lead us to underplay the importance of AI and to not really realize how significant it is. And certainly that's something we've done with technology in the past. If you think about the internet, which in many ways is a very similar technology, and it's what they call an enabling technology. It makes possible other things. And definitely there were people who underestimated the internet when it first emerged, when the World Wide Web became available in the 1990s. This is economist Paul Krugman, very, very smart guy. He's got a Nobel Prize for economics. He's one of the great thinkers in the world of economics, and that was what he said in 1998. By 2005 or so, it'll become clear the internet's impact on the economy has been no greater than the fax machine. As we know, it didn't quite work out that way, and I think there's definitely a possibility of that with AI. We may be underestimating the impact that it's ultimately going to have. And certainly there are a lot of very bright people in a lot of tech companies, those companies that have really driven change in the world economy over the past 2 decades, that believe AI is going to be very important in all of our lives in the future, and they are investing very heavily to make that happen. And if you look at, this is a chart, a couple of charts here. The crucial thing really just to understand about this is, the numbers are going up. This is the amount that the big tech companies are investing, and in particular, they're investing in data centers. And you can see that spending is going up at an annual rate of about 16% every year, going up and up and up. And a lot of that is because they think that they need to add more capacity to offer people AI applications. Again, may not be exactly clear how this is going to play out. It's clear to these companies it's going to be important, and probably there are going to be all sorts of uses for AI that we haven't even really dreamed of yet. Rather like the internet, it's going to be one of these technologies that we use in all kinds of ways in the future, as I say, in ways that will probably surprise us that people haven't thought of as I'm talking to you today. And another chart then just showing this is where those investments in new data center capacity are going, broken down by US states. And you can see it's happening all over the US, but in particular, there's a few real hotspots where that investment is concentrated. If you look some of those states down the end there, Virginia, Texas, Georgia, Arizona, these are places where a lot of new data center capacity is planned and is being built. And the rate at which new capacity is being added has really accelerated even just within the past year, that everyone's spending plans are being ramped up. And the reason that's a concern, I think, and really the sort of the fundamental point of what I'm talking to you about today, is that AI is very, very energy hungry. Anything you do with the AI consumes a lot of power, and this is shown on that bar chart there. The important thing to notice about this bar chart, it's a log scale, and if you can see those little kind of notches, each notch that goes up, this is not kind of one more than the one before, it's 10 times the one before. And you can see then right down the bottom there, things that are very low power, don't need so much power. A Google search, simple search if you're looking for text on Google. And then you go up and up and up to these kind of AI things. So if you're talking about creating an image with AI, something like that Jesus I showed you earlier, that uses about 10,000 times as much power as a simple Google search. So if people are doing those searches over and over again, then the demand for electricity to do these things goes up and up and up. And then that's images. As I say, it's about 10,000 times as much as a simple Google search. If you're talking about creating AI video, which of course is now increasingly popular, it's something people are doing a lot more of, then that's many multiples of that up again. So as I say, that energy demand for AI is huge. And you can see that already starting to crop up in people's forecasts for how much electricity they're going to need. This is a map of the US electricity market known as PJM. And the important thing about PJM is it includes the state of Virginia, which, as I was showing you earlier, that's a real hotspot for investment in new data center capacity. Northern Virginia, Loudoun County in Northern Virginia is what they call Data Center Alley. It's an area that has 35% of all the world's hyperscale, that means the very, very big data centers, 35% of all of those in the world are in that one county. On one estimate, about 70% of all of the world's internet traffic goes through that area. And so what that means is that, as I say, it's a big area for data centers now. It's very attractive as a place to site a data center because it's got the internet backbone connections there and so on. Regulatory regimes pretty favorable. You've got a workforce that knows how to operate data centers, all those kind of things. So it's big for data centers now. It's going to be bigger for data centers in the future, and that means it's going to need a lot more electricity. And we saw this, as I say, in this market, PJM. They produced some estimates recently of what data centers are going to mean for them. And you can see that at the moment they say data centers are about 4% of the total demand for electricity right the way across their grid. By 2039, they think that's going to be 16%, so a 4 times increase in the share that data centers account for on that grid. Just this year, in a single year, they raised their forecast for the power demand that they expect in 2039 by 12%. So that's a huge jump in just 1 year's forecast. We are forecasting, we at Wood Mackenzie are forecasting that power demand in PJM in total, that's across that whole market, it's going to rise 50% between now and 2050. So very, very strong growth in demand for electricity there. And that's a story which more or less we think is going to be repeated across the whole of the US, across North America and around the world. Those numbers, again, are showing growth in power demand across North America. US in green, Canada in red, Mexico in blue. And you can see that number just goes up a lot. It goes up about those three countries together using about 5.3 petawatt hours a year. A petawatt, that's a million billion watts. It's a lot of electricity being used already, but we think it's going to go up by about 50% across those three countries by 2050. And it's not just data centers, actually. That's an important part of the story to remember. So you have all these new data centers, but you also have new factories, this big effort that several countries have in terms of reshoring, bringing production back away from overseas markets. If you think about what's happening in the US with the CHIPS Act, with the Inflation Reduction Act, where they're trying to get manufacturing of chips, solar modules, batteries, EVs, they're trying to bring all those things into their own borders. All those factories need electricity. That's driving up demand again. You think about electric vehicles as everyone shifts to EVs. We don't know exactly how fast that's going to happen, but over time, more and more people are buying EVs. That means more demand for electricity and so on. Put all that together, as I say, basically the future is one where there is a lot more demand for power. Question, how do we meet that demand? Where does the supply come from to meet that demand? Well, there's one easy answer, which is natural gas. If you're looking at a way to provide 24/7 power, the kind of always reliable power that data centers will need, the easy thing to do is to build a new gas-fired power plant. And these are some numbers we've recently published just showing essentially how we've been kind of revising up our expectations for how much natural gas will be used in the US. And you can see, again, sorry, slightly complicated chart, but look at the orange bar there in the left-hand chart. That shows the increase in our expectation for how much more power demand there's going to be in the US in 2050. And the blue bar there is showing how much of that we think will be met by increased natural gas-fired generation. And you can see that basically the blue accounts for most of the orange there. So most of that increased demand is being met by new supply from natural gas. And then on the right-hand side there, that's just showing how we think US demand for natural gas is going to be higher because of needing to burn more gas in those power plants that are needed for the data centers. And as far as the energy transition goes, that's really not ideal. I'm sure you've all seen charts like this before. There's basically demand for the three fossil fuels and what it looks like in different states of the world. And essentially, the two I want to draw your attention to are the two lower lines there. The pink line, that's essentially what we would need to do if all the countries of the world were to meet their pledges under the Paris Agreement. And the green line is the path we'd need to be on to get to net zero by 2050. And you can see that in all of these cases, all three fossil fuels, we need to cut demand really very rapidly, starting pretty soon. Gas probably is the one that has a bit more leeway. You can probably afford to cut demand for natural gas a bit more slowly than for coal and for oil, which really need to fall off very rapidly. But even so, the downward trend there in natural gas is essentially what we're going to need to have, we think, to meet those Paris goals. And actually what's happening is we're moving further away from those lines. We're moving towards those higher trajectories shown there. And basically, if we're in that position, if in 2050 we are using more natural gas than we're using now, and if actually demand is still rising, then that has very serious implications for the climate. That is not good news at all. So, question. Is this where we're headed then? Is this the future that AI means for us? That connection between AI data centers, power demand, and gas demand, does it have potentially fatal consequences for the global climate? Well, it might do, but it's not certain. And so I was saying I wanted to leave you with some more optimistic messages. These are, I think, the more positive signs in the rise of AI. One is that we also have very, very rapid growth in supply of renewable energy, particularly wind and solar, which I'm showing here. You can see those going up very fast. Wind and solar aren't ideal for a data center because most of the time your data center needs to be always on, needs 24/7 power. It's not great. You can't, I'm sounding like Donald Trump when I say this, but there is a real point here, which is that if you say, I want to generate something with AI, I'd like it to write my term paper for me, and the server comes back and says, well, I'm sorry, it's nighttime, you can't do that. That's not ideal. That's not what these companies want to be able to provide in terms of the service for their customers. So solar and power aren't ideal, but definitely they can be part of the solution, and combinations of solar and wind and storage altogether can play a very important role in keeping data centers running. And so we are seeing the big tech companies, they have been huge investors in renewable energy. Amazon was the biggest buyer of renewable energy anywhere in the world last year, and they're going to continue to support the growth of wind and solar. So they're definitely part of that very positive story in terms of the growth of wind and solar that we're seeing there. But almost more important than that is what's happening in terms of new technologies, what you might call the frontier technologies of low carbon energy that can provide that 24/7 power that the data centers need while also having low or zero emissions. And something, for instance, I think is very, very exciting has been this development, which is Google backing the development of a 115 megawatt enhanced geothermal plant in Nevada to serve their data centers. Enhanced geothermal, I think, is a really, really exciting technology. This is basically the latest iteration of geothermal energy, which uses a lot of the techniques that have evolved in oil and gas. It uses horizontal drilling, uses hydraulic fracturing, and it's a way of building geothermal plants that get around a lot of the problems of existing geothermal energy. On the whole, as you may know, geothermal energy can only be produced where the conditions are kind of exactly right. This enhanced geothermal, with these new techniques, opens up much, much wider areas as being potentially suitable for geothermal development, and that can provide you with that 24/7 zero carbon power. So that's potentially a really important technology for the future, and who is helping pioneer that, who's supporting the development of these new plants with these special tariffs where basically Google is paying for them, and they're making sure that the costs of these new innovative plants aren't being spread across all ratepayers in the region. It's the tech companies that are doing that, and that's, I think, really important development and a very, very positive step. And as I say, that's basically AI creating demand for data centers, driving forward these new energy technologies. It's also true in nuclear. So this is something you may well have seen this announcement a few weeks ago. This is pretty amazing in some respects. This is 3 Mile Island, nuclear plant in Pennsylvania. This is, of course, famous for having had a nuclear accident in 1979. It sort of became notorious. It was kind of a byword for the dangers of nuclear power. There were 2 reactors on the site. One had the accident, that got shut down. The other one remained in operation. In fact, all the way till 2019. It was only closed down for economic reasons, nothing to do with safety, just it wasn't profitable. And now Microsoft have come along, they've signed a 20-year power purchase agreement with that plant, and that still working, perfectly functional reactor is going to be reopened again and will start generating power from 2028. And again, this is really important because nuclear is a very powerful technology for all its drawbacks, and obviously there are lots of issues in particular about the economics of nuclear and how long it takes to build a new plant and how much it costs and so on. But what's really valuable about it is it provides that 24/7, always-on, reliable baseload power with zero emissions. That's what the tech companies want. It's actually going to be an important part of the energy transition in general. We're also going to see, I think, tech companies investing, making the commitments of money to support the investment in new reactors as well. I think that's going to come soon. I would say to all of you, watch out for those announcements. And again, I think that's a very, very positive development being driven by AI. And then there's also the last resort, the kind of, in case of emergency, break glass of global warming, which is carbon removals. Given that we are going to continue using fossil fuels for many decades to come, it seems very likely that at the end of the day, we're going to have technologies for actually removing carbon from the atmosphere. And these are some projects we're showing that are underway right now. These are things like what they call DAC, direct air capture, that's sucking carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. That's BECCS, which is bioenergy with carbon capture and storage. And that's what they call, broadly speaking, nature-based solutions. So, I mean, the kind of reductive shorthand for that is planting trees, but anything involving nature and plants and using those plants to take carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and sequester it. There's quite a lot of activity going on there already, but as you can see, it's in the kind of tens of millions of tons per year range, and we're going to need a lot more than that. This is a somewhat confusing chart again, but if you I just draw your attention, essentially look at the big bars there. So what that is saying is, in a world, realistically, where the world does actually get to net zero, these carbon removals are going to have to be a big part of it, and not on the tens of millions of tons scale, but on the billions of tons of carbon dioxide being removed from the atmosphere every year. And as I say, you get to, I think that's sort of 8 billion tons a year by 2050 in a net zero scenario. That looks like what we're going to have to do. And these projects are often expensive. It's hard to finance them, it's hard to put a business model together, but the tech companies are playing a key role in financing those carbon removals. And a lot of them, you know, the names I've put up there, Microsoft, Meta, Google, Amazon, Apple, Netflix, all of those companies are being instrumental in supporting the development of pilot projects for working out how to remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. And in the long term, I think that's going to be really, really important. And again, I think that's a really welcome development that these companies are doing that. Quick digression. So I've talked a lot about AI and downsides of AI and the power demand for AI. It obviously also has big implications for energy supply. I know a few people have talked about that already at this event, and hopefully you've heard some of what they're saying. Just very few quick examples here, but if you look at AI in grid management, it can help manage grids more efficiently, reduce the risk of blackouts and so on. If you look at AI in wind power, it can help optimize wind farms, get them in the right place, arrange the turbines in the right ways in order to maximize production, minimize land use. And also AI is already having very important, is playing a very important role in development of new materials that could be used for solar panels, for batteries and so on. Researchers are finding themselves able to use AI to perform experiments, develop materials, test things much, much faster than they would have been able to in the past. And so all these areas are things that AI is doing where it's kind of changing the energy system already. And as I say, just given the kind of technology that AI is, there are going to be all sorts of other uses that we haven't even thought of yet. Maybe even some people in this room right now will come up with brilliant, clever ways to use AI in the energy industry in the future, and there's an enormous amount of potential there. So that's where I come out on AI, I think, finally, which is to think that although it's right to be nervous about it, it's right to be wary, it can be something that we can embrace and look on in a positive way. When I think about the energy transition, what is the energy transition? Essentially, it's a massive industrial exercise. It's a huge effort of investment in infrastructure and in innovation. And all of those things are much, much easier to do in a market, in an industry that's expanding and growing and sees a positive future, rather than in one that is stagnating and shrinking and looking backwards. Going back to the Terminators, I'm sure many of you will have seen the film Terminator 2. It's right there, right? AI can be our friend. There can be such a thing as good AI. I don't want to be complacent about it. As I say, I think people are right to be wary and to be cautious. I think that the good AI and the good uses of AI will only emerge if industries are pushed in the right way, if we make sure that policies are right, politicians and regulators and the public and all of us as consumers, as employees, as shareholders, make sure that the incentives are set to drive the industry down routes that are positive for all of us. But I think that it absolutely can be done. I think AI can be our friend. AI can be a supporter and a helper and a valuable aid in the energy transition. But it's up to all of us, up to all of you, up to me, up to everyone in the world to make sure that that's what it is. Thanks very much.